Clicking the button.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay, I think we're live now. I think we're here. I had to, okay. I had posted in the chat a couple minutes ago being like, we're getting set up, give us a minute. And someone was like, tell Ross to get it together. We know it's him. I actually forgot to send him the link. I was like, hey, like, you ready? And he's like, do I get a link? And I was like, oh yeah, like literally 2 minutes before we were supposed to start. So, it's great and all that stuff. But yeah, so we're in the third stream of, that's the wrong mouse. The third stream of the day. Fourth stream of the day. I'm slowly losing it. The level of sanity has decreased significantly. A lot. But now we have Ross here with us, so we're totally going to be way more sane and productive.
Yeah, we all hope so.
Yeah. I feel like everyone knew who Artifexian was, and I feel like everyone knows who you are, but I feel like there might be slightly less people that know who you are than who know who Edgar is. So do you want to like...
They may not know who I am, but they have been touched by my work.
That's true.
Yeah, so I'm Ross Bay. I'm a geographer. I'm doing my PhD in historical, political, and cultural geography, but I've also instructed and taught physical geography. I got into contact with Edgar about his, wind and pressure systems map, and we started working together from there. I worked with him through the climate series and some of the stuff leading up to that. I did that whole manual temperature map modeling. Yeah, we've continued to work together to get through the weather guide and do some other stuff. I'll continue to work with Edgar as he gets close to the kind of culture building and those sorts of things, because that's the kind of geography I tend to do. And then Madeline and I have been discussing the development of politics and states, things like human migration, because that's the sort of stuff that like a human and social geographer tends to deal with. And in particular, I'm looking at the development of states in spatializing that and how that occurs over time. Yes, cute Seamus, you have in fact been touched.
Yeah,
so if you've been watching anything from Madeline or from Edgar for the past few months, no, it's almost been a year now for Edgar, then you would have seen been interacting with my work.
Yes.
Yeah, and I did my undergrad in medieval studies, so and I did a lot of linguistics and those sorts of things, and I started world building before my undergrad, so I feel like my interest in world building kind of shaped my academic career, to make me sort of uniquely qualified to talk about certain things as it relates to world building. But I don't know anything else besides like world building and I don't know, like Taylor Swift or something like that. Very narrow. And I don't know, like work wise and stuff. Like I don't know, I know how to drive a forklift, and I bake bread and make salami and cheese and flour.
You grind your own flour?
I do grind my own flour, and I make my own acorn and chestnut flour and that kind of thing as well. I pick my own mushrooms and things. I work with goats a fair amount. So, just very, very normal skill sets.
Yeah.
No. This is a prude stream, cute Seamus.
Oh my gosh. Were you here when we were talking with Edgar with people about the struggles he's had sometimes with talking to like experts in various fields, like the glaciologist?
Yeah. And I have talked with some of my colleagues about glaciology and different climate discussions, talking about orthographic precipitation and those kinds of things. I think the way that some of them I show the map to, and I'm like, hey, look at this, and For that, I usually present it as kind of like, oh, this would be something that I would like to do as like a lab exercise, right?
Mm.
So in first year, if you're in introduction to, physical geography, it would be fun if all the students had to make maps and had to, create their own kind of Köppen climate maps as a learning exercise, as kind of like a
Oh.
practical application. And that's also like there's a linguist in my university and in past universities that I've been at who use like the Conlang construction kit and stuff like that to teach linguistics to their students. Um, and that's been a way that I've also used conlanging. So like when I'm learning a language that is like has split ergative constructions where it's nominative accusative in the present tense and ergative in the past tense, or oblique accusative or whatever it is in the past tense,
Mhm.
I will conlang a language that has that feature. And through that process, it helps me understand what's going on a bit better.
Mhm.
So I think like there are academics who will be interested in those sorts of things, but a lot of them, don't really. They're like, why would you do this? Like, it's not something that really occurs to them uh, as something to do.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And also knowing like you probably have the ability to be slightly more successful at it than like Edgar does, just because like you're sort of coming from their wheelhouse and you know how to word it best to them, you know,
Yes, yeah,
which is
um,
fun.
and a lot of the speculative stuff, that I know, Nikolai gets more into with models and these kinds of things, like,
Mm,
um, yeah, like that has a lot of power to help people in some of their world building. At the same time, a lot of these computational models are not very accessible.
yeah.
You need to like know how to code in Linux, and
Hmm.
a lot of these programs do not have a user interface. So you just have to like open a like txt file and like type in your instructions, and then hit the program and
Right.
it'll just run and then give you output in a different folder. And for I think a lot of people, their computer literacy is quite limited to
Mm,
stuff where there is a GUI, and so it can also be like off-putting to kind of get into that kind of stuff. So the stuff that Nikolai's doing, making like guides to help people with ClimaSim and Exoplasm,
hmm.
is very helpful.
Yeah.
um, and that is quite cool work. um, and it's interesting too because I guess I've been working on my world building project, the same one, for about 8 or 9 years now. um and I remember when I started working on it kind of seeing Edgar's videos coming out, so it's neat that we were kind of like world building in the same in parallel kind of, and then eventually we got together to work together and those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very cool how it all has like kind of been working out, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's very fun.
Mm. And one thing that we wanted to talk about was
Yes.
fortifications.
I was about to ask about that because
Yeah.
we've been discussing this a lot in here with how I have this set up.
Yeah.
Uh so like I'm very curious in the general stuff and then also the stuff that relates to what we got going on right here. Do you want me to give you like the background of what we talked about on for this so far? Or do you want to do like general first?
Well, no, we can talk about the background for this so far.
Okay. So for this city here we have, which is a capital city, my
Hmm.
idea was I was going more for the like, this is a city that like may have had more, you know, danger or warfare in the past, but like it's been very peaceful lately. It feels very secure. It doesn't have as much impetus to be investing a lot into you know, specific defenses and that sort of a thing. So I have, if you can kind of see like the pink line, the pink
Hmm.
border that's a lot bigger, that's kind of the extent of the proper city. And
Yeah.
it's kind of spilled out from the city walls, but they haven't bothered expanding the city walls yet.
Hmm.
Um, but we have that. We have a couple of like inner sections that have city walls in them. And then right now, because one of the issues that kind of posed was one of the benefits of having the big city walls and the gates is to direct, like trade and traffic and be able to impose tariffs on
Mhm.
the goods moving through. So I moved those to potentially being at the rivers. So where
Yeah.
basically everything is coming from the water or from the roads up there. So it can be taxed at that point
Mhm.
and then be brought in. And that's sort of as far as we've gotten thus far.
Yeah. And the city, may have emerged. How old is the city?
Um, okay, so it's probably as like a city of some form that's probably the capital. It's probably been around for at least 500 years.
Okay.
But it's definitely gotten bigger and a little bit more like not bureaucratic, but like it's changed a little bit socially. So there's some like parts of the city that's changed since then, but
And what is the kind of, technological equivalency that these folks have?
probably like very early Renaissance, very late medieval period. So there's no
Mhm.
like firearms or anything like that, but there's still
They
going to
had
be like
firearms.
what?
In the late
No,
medieval period, they had firearms.
no, there's no firearms.
Okay.
Nope, they don't have that. They're so like certain things are not the same. So like it's more probably technology levels of like early upper middle ages, but in like Asia side of like Korea or like Joseon
Okay.
era kind of technology levels where like they had some like kind of in that area they're just kind of starting to get like there's maybe a few experimental firearms, but
Yeah.
they had like fireworks and like they had the concept of gunpowder, but they also had like your
Mhm.
printing press, but it's less like I feel like in like medieval Europe you see their weaponry technologically seemed a lot more advanced compared to like maybe their agricultural or other types of innovations for a while.
Well, when they got like guns were brought over, they were effectively a thing. So,
Right.
people brought over guns and cannons and they're like, here's guns and cannons.
Mm.
Um, yeah, because I think the kind of first gunpowder weapons would be kind of like, I don't know, 900s or so in China. We have evidence for them.
Yeah. Like they
Um,
might exist, but they're not
yeah.
relevant
Okay.
at a large scale yet.
But like the aesthetic you're going for is more of, I guess, like an East Asian or Southeast Asian aesthetic. I heard Cambodia or Vietnam brought up.
Yeah, I've looked a lot at northern Vietnam, but also looking in some of the like there's pulls from northern Vietnam a lot, especially in the like climate and some of the stuff like that, and some of the architectural structures of like the buildings and how they handled the heat and the temperature, given like because they're also like very hilly and mountainous, but also some vibes from like Joseon dynasty and also
Mhm.
some Gothic Victorian, mostly aesthetic witchy vibes. That's where like the witchy vibes are coming from.
Oh, there's witchy vibes.
There's witchy vibes. There's witches, so there's obviously witchy vibes, right?
Oh,
That's the
oh,
hat.
this is your hat. Yes,
This is
this
the
is
hat.
the spell streams.
Yes.
So if we're thinking about more of an East and Southeast Asia, a lot of their fortifications, especially city fortifications, were made from rammed or tamped earthen ramparts.
Okay.
So a rampart is usually it's an embankment of dirt, and then you put and it can be reinforced with wood, and then you have a face on it. It could be a wooden face, it could be a stone face, and then there's a parapet on top. So
Mm,
kind of extending the wall upwards
right.
to protect the people on top of the rampart from the people who would be besieging the rampart. Um, and usually, when you build these ramparts, um, these go hand in hand with trench works.
Okay.
So you dig a ditch in front of where you want the rampart to be, and then you take all the earth from that and you put it behind and you tamp it down and stack it up.
Mm.
And this is really useful because if somebody wants to sap and dig under your walls to collapse them, uh, they have to dig deeper than your ditch.
Right.
And this is also why moats are useful, because if you're trying to dig under a ditch filled with water and you make a mistake, you suddenly have a flooded tunnel instead of a useful sapping tunnel.
Right.
Um, it also helps because it prevents various siege machinery from getting to the wall.
Okay.
So if you wanted to bring a battering ram up to the wall to knock it down, or if you wanted to bring a siege tower up to a wall to shoot down onto the people who are defending it, if you wanted to get ladders, um, the point of some of these things is to increase what in like military and conflict studies is known as friction.
Okay.
So um, if we think about like for the Romans, they had Hadrian's Wall, right? They had
Mm.
that wall between what is now Scotland and then England. Um, and the point of the wall is to increase the minimum necessary to invade.
Mm.
So if you have a region and there's no border wall, just any kind of brigand could kind of just run across the border, show up at a town, ransack it, and run away.
Right.
But if you put a wall in the way, even if it's not defended, well, now these brigands, there need to be enough of them to bring ladders.
Mm-hmm.
They have to scale the wall. That takes time. Then they have to leave people to defend the ladders at the
Mm.
wall. So that increases the number of people you need in order to engage in this.
Right.
Um, so, this kind of defensive situation just increases the minimal necessary preparedness and forces for any kind of offensive that they want to make.
Right.
And then things like, the ditch having an outer rampart with a trench. So usually outside of a city, you would have um, another set of fortifications, which would include like a trench and a rampart. Probably wouldn't have, like a parapet or something on top of it, but
Mm.
it is another speed bump. And, when you want to attack a city, you've got to organize your people, you got to get them to line up and be in their units, and then they got
Mm.
to march towards it. They hit the trench. Okay, now they got to like go into the trench and then climb up the other side, fight their way out. They become disorganized. They become tired. Some of them
Mm.
die or get injured. And then you need to reorganize them again,
Right.
get them to line up again, make sure they're not too hot and they're not thirsty, and then send them again.
Mm.
And it gets more difficult in the heat of battle for officers to organize troops, especially after they encounter these like multiple points of friction. So anything that can make it more difficult, and oftentimes like building a stone wall, like we see in like the high Middle Ages, that's really expensive.
Mm.
Takes a lot of time, takes a lot of labor. The stone's usually coming from far away, and then you have to keep it maintained.
Right. Which is
And
expensive.
often, and in the high medieval period, they didn't have a very well developed administration or bureaucratic system, so uh, oftentimes they would let their castles fall into decay until they knew they needed to use them.
Right.
Hi, Aaron. Um,
Yeah.
and then they would rapidly try to fix them. And they would add all these like wooden structures onto them to like improve their defensiveness.
Mm.
And there's been some movies where they've shown that. I think say what you will, but like Kingdom of Heaven. So you see the walls of Jerusalem, and then when the battle comes, they actually build like these wooden extensions on top that would protect the people on the walls or the ramparts from incoming enemy fire. So like a lot of these last minute things would be thrown on because they're easy to do.
Mm.
And it is always much easier to dig a ditch and make an embankment behind it than it is to get everybody to scramble to fix a stone wall.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, you mothball your forts in EU4, right? Um, and then you don't have to. But then when the war starts and you get your forts all back up, then you lose all of your manpower to garrisons. That's the other thing.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so and if you have a well organized city that has a good administration, a good bureaucracy, you could probably have either city employed workers, or you could oftentimes this stuff was outsourced to the community, and they would be like compensated, or it would be considered part of their like taxes for them to like work on various city infrastructure,
Hmm.
or
Right.
it would just be part of living in the city. So in a lot of medieval cities, you know if you lived on in the city, your house is on the street, it would be your responsibility to make sure that the stretch of street in front of you to the middle of the road was clean.
Right. Which makes
um
sense.
yeah, and it was just like something that you did as a community member. It was something that was expected of you. um so that if your culture is organized with different like kin groups, like clan groups, or tribes, or what have you,
Yeah.
they could like it's like, oh, it's the month of, I don't know, wet rain or something, so
Right.
it's this clan's job to repair the walls and redig the trenches. um and
Right.
if there's been a period of peace, then people may have slacked off a bit.
Right.
uh you know um And
Right.
another important thing about walls and city walls and fortifications is that they're often were not only made for defense; they were often made to make the people inside feel safe.
Mm.
So when there are periods where there is a perceived increase in conflict, sometimes cities would decide that they were going to like shell out and fix all their walls up, even if they never had to use them. Um, so it's not always about the uh, the threat of an attack. There is also the perception of the threat of attack.
Okay. So for this one, so I definitely like they definitely would have the bureaucracy and administration to manage repairs, and they have like the sort of clan style groups that like I feel like any of that would absolutely make sense.
Hmm.
What do you think would be, given that they've already like exploded outside of the city walls so much, like do you think there's like more stuff I would need to add in here, or like expand, like would these uh like
Well,
would there be like more like, you know?
it depends on how recently they kind of have been at war.
So I think there's been some like in terms of like large scale conflicts. It's probably been like there's probably been hundreds of years of peace.
So then they probably haven't been doing a very good job.
Right.
Yeah. Uh, and just for we have Mval the gamer. East Asia pretty well maintained cities due to extensive bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and that changes over time. So I mean, in particular, we can think about um, uh, what is now China over different dynasties. When there were more fragmented periods uh, prior to and after, or with competing empires, you do see a lot of administration and capacity put towards keeping and maintaining military fortifications. But then what happens is these empires frequently were able to conquer large pieces of East Asia, and they had no peer competitors. So there was no one who could reasonably threaten them. And so that stuff kind of fell to the wayside as they focused on other things. And then, of course, who would they be fighting? Largely, they'd be fighting rebellions, or they'd be fighting pirates from Japan, or occasionally there could be an incursion from nomads. So you may have certain areas that are militarized, and oftentimes those provinces would have governors who, would have very well maintained armies, and then these armies would come to challenge the imperial armies and these sorts of things. We also have issues like in Japan, when the Japanese in their medieval period were fighting amongst themselves, their fortifications weren't that great, because when the Mongols invaded, they were able to take Japanese fortifications very quickly.
Mm.
It was after that they started innovating in their swords and their armor and their fortifications, and they actually dedicated a lot of resources that was very unpopular to actually create better fortifications in case the Mongols ever came back, which they didn't really. So again, the perceived threats.
Mm.
And we have good examples of these periods with like when the would have been the Ming. I think when the Ming or the Qing, again, not a East Asian historian. When you had stuff like the Taiping Rebellion and the Boxer Rebellion and all those rebellions that were happening around the time that the Europeans were showing up in East Asia, there had been a long period of peace. A lot of authority had been decentralized to the provinces, where they're essentially like each province had their own warlord with their own army, and it was up to them to kind of maintain things. And they didn't always do a very good job. So while in East Asia there are times where they had, very well maintained fortifications, there are also times where they failed. And that was another thing with East Asia, is that cannons were not particularly useful for taking forts in fortifications in East Asia because of this rammed earth system.
Mm.
Because when you
That makes
fire a
sense.
cannon at a rammed earth wall, the cannonball just kind of hits and the rammed earth absorbs the impact. Cannons did very well against stone walls that were thin with pile in between them. And that's why Europeans shifted from building those walls to building rammed earth walls and star fortresses and those sorts of things. So, in
Mm.
response to cannons, they actually innovated fortification systems that are very similar to what was going on in mainland East Asia, from the pressures that were there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And there's for what I'm working here, like there's not a lot of pressures yet. Like obviously they're going into a period of time that is going to like they might be doing some scrambling to maybe add some defenses, but there's just probably not going to be enough there, which probably like this probably level is probably fine. Like I could always add in some things that would have been like not repaired. Like maybe they had tried a couple times to start making a wall around the greater city and then kind of just like didn't keep up with it. Like
That is great. Having unfinished walls is very classic medieval period. It was the Qing. Yeah. It was that's the period of time I was thinking of. But yeah, so having an unfinished wall like in the middle, so like see the northern, assuming that up is north.
yeah.
In kind of that northern section, like you could have a wall that's kind of like, like a quarter of a complete circle,
Right. Like just
and
like a
they're
little
just,
like oh
yeah, it's like, oh, we did it. Yeah, we're done. We're tired.
I like that. Okay.
Yeah. So that's so small scale conflict and city unrest may not be enough to justify maintaining defenses. No, it may not be enough to justify maintaining defenses, especially if those are very short term conflicts and like people can just come inside what seem to be the relatively well maintained walls.
Mm.
Um, so like if there's like a bit of a civil unrest and a bunch of rural people decide they want to like come in, tell folks at the capital they're unhappy. Anyone who's important can just come inside the old walls there, and they could probably wait it out, because the amount of organization it would take to maintain a siege around a relatively well stocked fortification like that would probably outstrip any sort of momentary rebellion or minor civil conflict.
Right.
But like if you had like, I don't know, German Peasants' War kind of uprising, then yeah, those peasants were able to siege cities and take them, because there were enough of them and they got well organized, and there were also a lot of them were had been levies for armies, or they had like knights and lords and mercenaries joining them and helping them organize things. So if the knowledge is there and if the organizational capacity is there, but then that stops being a small conflict.
Right.
So yeah, and yeah, there could be some little areas with partial walls.
Yeah, I like that. I think that'll be good.
Yeah. And then having portions of a river in a city is a good idea. And the other thing that can happen too is for smaller rivers, like the one that is running southwest of the city, you can they could sort of wall it up, so they could turn that section into a bit of a canal by artificially reinforcing the banks of that river, so it does not shift or move. Because that's something that when thinking about where to place a city, you usually don't want to build your city on the inside of a bend, because the inside of a bend is the shallow side, and that is the side that gets flooded. You also don't want to build your city too close to the outsides of the bend, because that side is the side that gets eaten out and then collapses. So building it near a smaller river and one that could be, controlled to some degree, and if you have canals and stuff coming off it, then you may have, little dams and those sorts of things that can help direct and flow water through those canals. And with lock systems as well, oftentimes they have lakes and things just off the locks as like a supply of water to kind of facilitate filling and draining locks. So that may be something else.
I could see that happening more in the elevation change here probably wouldn't even require it, honestly.
Yeah, but I mean, if you have irrigation, if you have the canals going through, and if you're using those for irrigation, it may be worthwhile to have irrigation ponds as like a backup to like hold water. And that's something that's also done in what kind of climate would this be? Is like a AW or AM?
AF, AM.
Okay. Yeah, so if it's an AM, a lot of people who live in AM cultures often have different forms of water retaining bodies, like lakes and ponds and these kinds of things, that help them keep water through the dry period.
Right.
That is also something that is quite useful. And like, even if you have an AF climate, there are still often drier periods, depending on how close it is to the boundary between AF, AM, AW kind of thing.
Yeah, it'll probably depend on like the different what's it even called? Like which parts of like the mountains you're on and stuff. Or the wind catches. Because this part, good, it's not okay. I need to give that a second to decide it's happy again. Someone asked why the growth of the town is biased so strongly to the south. Most of that is just because that's what I've started building so far. but those little gate defenses on those roads, I'm gonna make equal the same ones, I think, up on the north side, where the river is there. I just haven't done it yet because I was waiting to see if Ross thought they were a dumb idea or not.
What, the towers, the gatehouses and things?
These things down here, which are more just like places to collect the imports and like guard the cross of the city, I guess.
No, that is a very normal thing. And it is also great because, if that is the only reasonable river crossing nearby, then setting up fortification, like a little fort there, and you would also, probably have some sort of river defense, so you could be able to like pull up a chain, uh,
Mm.
or you could dump stuff, or put up a palisade or something in the water, raise something up in the water that could prevent people from, um, you know, uh, sailing up the river or sailing down the river.
Mm-hmm.
That would be quite useful. But yeah, that is a great way to create friction and to create layers and depth of defense. Um, you always want a depth of defense to kind of break up and create that friction. Uh, and this is, something that I think a lot of people think about for like World War One, where
Mm-hmm.
when you think about the trenches that developed, the trench systems, there was the front trench, and then there were back trenches, you know, and these trench systems were all about depth of defense. And against common misconceptions, offensives in World War One succeeded a lot and were quite devastating.
Mm-hmm.
And most often, offensives were able to take the first set of trenches. However, by the time they took the first set of trenches, they had worn down, right? Like they'd suffer casualties, they ran out of ammunition, they were tired, they were hungry, they were thirsty, didn't want to be there anymore. And that was when the counterattack would happen, and it would push them away. And so, you have this back and forth of attacks and counterattacks. So it wasn't like being in the defensive was not a great situation, because you often, especially if you're in the front of a trench being attacked, you often did not have a very good time. So if somebody attacks and they take your fort, they get past the fort, they start coming to the city walls, and they have to go through a ditch, you could attack them when they're trying to cross the ditch and push them back. Oftentimes it is this kind of back and forth for tempos of siege and of trench warfare and those sorts of things, like the twins from Game of Thrones. Yeah, you normally want to have stuff on both sides. That is an example of Martin doing a decent job.
Yeah, yeah. I think that makes sense. And it definitely it makes sense from a maintenance perspective too, that like those smaller things would be a lot easier for them to be like, okay, like maybe we won't finish all these walls, but like, the river part, that's good. That's like smaller. We can, like the what's it, like more value to effort ratio.
Yeah, for sure. And
Mm-hmm.
if there's been small scale conflict, like was mentioned above, like how often did those attempts get past these river forts?
Right. Probably
Right?
wouldn't
Like,
be very often.
so if these, if the garrisons of these fortifications are able to hold, minor incursions off fairly well, like, yeah, they may be very well maintained, and well garrisoned. Meanwhile, maybe some of the other ramparts of the old wall and, have kind of maybe crumbled in. Maybe some of the palisades have, come off. Maybe people have stolen parts of the palisades and used them to build their houses. Very common thing throughout the medieval period.
Mm-hmm.
That's especially for Rome too. Like, one of the reasons why a lot of those old buildings, like the Colosseum, they were picked clean. Like people went over and were like, oh, look at these big rocks lying around that nobody's using.
We'll just take those.
Yeah, and the same thing happened to the pyramids in Egypt too. Like people just took the outer stones and used them to build stuff.
Mm.
People are very economic that way. Like, why do I have to cut new stones? There's old
There's some right
stones.
there.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, it
and
makes sense.
Night Luna. Someone left the stream.
Oh yeah, good night.
Yeah. So yeah, and the thing is, and with these, the ramparts probably aren't as tall. They're probably not as thick. They probably still have trenches though, um, especially along the sides facing away from the river. They would probably have a ditch, and then the road
So here?
would, yeah. So, and on the other side of the river as well. So you'd want ditches going along the outside facing away from the river. So on the
Facing
north.
away.
Oh,
Up here?
yeah, up there.
Okay, okay.
And then the road would not, it would be flanked by ditches. And
so let's see.
And if people wanted to, there you go. Yeah.
And then up the road?
It could, yeah, along the side of the road. And that could also help if they maintain the roads well. If there's rain and stuff, then it would catch the rain. And a lot of older roads were actually built with a angle. So they're like pointed in the middle, like the roof of a house. And then they have a slight angle so that rain and stuff like that would go off the sides. Yeah. So if you have stuff like that, I mean, it could even link up with the river, but the lower level of the trench isn't as low as the riverbed. So water would be, kind of on a slight plane going down into the river, but unless the river seriously flooded, it would not go back up into the trench.
Right, and make a moat.
Yeah.
So then down here, it would be on like this side over here.
Yeah.
Like just right across.
And on the side with the river, they would probably, pack up more dirt on that side, make a berm. If they were there long enough, they may, dig in and put, palisades in there and then pack them in with earth just to make sure that the river doesn't shift.
I don't know.
Modern roads and AM also have angles and ditches on the side. Yeah. The people have continued to do that. It's very important to do.
Probably do something like that.
Arguably, people not in AM climate should also do that.
Yeah.
Especially in North America, as we experience more intense precipitation events. It becomes more important to direct precipitation to places where the ground can absorb it, because and a lot of places in North America we're receiving more precipitation, but we're receiving them in fewer, more severe events,
which is great.
Yeah, it's a great time. Lot more flooding, a lot more mudslides and rivers backing up and those sorts of things. Yeah. And they would maintain those. Yeah, they'd have to maintain the ditches. They have to keep digging them out. Probably wouldn't be the funnest part of being part of the town garrison. But through most of history, most of what soldiers did was dig.
Just funny to think about.
Yeah, they just dug a lot. And it was often more useful to keep soldiers busy digging than giving them free time.
I mean, get into less trouble probably.
Yep. If you give them, I guess I don't think it's swear, but I don't have another term, like bullshit busy work. Then that is very useful for officers and the military in general, because when they have time on their hands, they can cause problems. No problem time for them.
Would there be any of these ditches around like the main walls or?
Yeah. However, inside the city, they may have been filled in. So we do have examples of old walls around the city center, which used to be around the entire city, but then people start sprawling outside. You have this urban sprawl that starts to happen. People
Mm,
just fill in the ditches,
right.
and then they build houses there.
Yeah.
So on the on the north side of your wall, where there's a bit of space between the road and the rant, like the kind of jagged edge of the wall there, you could
Right.
just put houses in there.
Right. Which I was planning on.
Yeah, so that's
What?
something that is very common.
Well, let's for funsies.
And people also would build walls along would build homes on the inside of walls as well.
Mm,
And there's actually some really cool medieval art of people where they would in colosseums, like old like Roman colosseums, they would actually build homes on the inside of the colosseums, and they would stack the buildings on top of each other against the colosseum walls, both on the inside and outside, which is very cool. If you want to check out images of that.
what?
If you build along that against the wall, you'll have a wall less to build. Exactly. That's precisely the point.
Oh my gosh, I can't type that much. I'm gonna look that up later. I can't reach my keyboard well enough to type that complex of a word. A lot of efforts. Okay, so I think we're looking pretty good here from a walls perspective then. This may not be as horrendous as I thought it would be.
No. I mean, you would also probably either this city or the polity at large would probably have fortifications like a fort or something upstream and downstream.
Mm.
And at this point, maybe all they do is kind of monitor trade. But the idea is like, oh, if people want to attack you, it is always, you want to give yourself more time. You want to create that depth of defense, create more speed bumps and road bumps.
Right. Right, which if I pull up, let me just save again. We open up, where is our little friend? Da, 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 da.
And I think in your Discord, I did mention this in response to someone posting a video about castles. In Tolkien, who was a medievalist, he understood a decent amount about medieval warfare and fortifications. So in the movie Two Towers, the Battle of the Hornburg or the Battle of Helm's Deep takes place on the Deeping Wall and the Hornburg itself. But in the book, the first phase of that battle is actually a fight at the Helm's Dyke. So they had a ditch and an embankment with ramparts outside the Deeping Wall, I'm not good with American, about a mile, I guess, a mile away from the Deeping Wall. So when people were retreating to get into the Hornburg and into the Shining Caves or whatever, there were Rohirrim there, fighting off the vanguard of Saruman's army. And then once everyone got in, they fought for a bit, and then they pulled back in an orderly fashion. So, and that is an example of, defense in depth and creating friction, right? Because if there's nothing there, then an attacking army could walk right up to the Deeping Wall like they did in the movie. There are differences in, pacing and those sorts of things. Like in Two Towers, the Battle of Helm's Deep or the Hornburg, I think is one chapter, but it makes up the bulk of the Two Towers movie. So there's some different, kind of narrative structures that work better for film than they do for books. But
which
yeah. But there are some cool examples in Tolkien of how medieval people would kind of operate.
So next question then.
Mm-hmm.
So right now this fun little cyan blue color is sort of what I'm labeling my
Cyan.
military or defensive related buildings. So like
Hmm.
little jails, little barracks, little like whatever sort of buildings. Right now we have like a main like high profile complex in the administrative center, which could be for like, high profile things,
Yeah.
officer training, like the fancy bits.
And the how are the people organized for like how's their military organized? Because like a medieval military and like garrisons and those sorts of things are quite different than how they're often presented. Oh, there's a town watch, like it's a police force of like,
Right.
yeah. So I was just wondering, and jails as well, like they would normally, depending on the administrative capacity, free like minor short-term things.
Mm-mm.
So it's like,
Yeah.
oh, this person's drunk, we're going to throw them in there for the night. Or
Yeah.
you have a situation where it's like, oh, someone's broken the peace, we're going to keep them in jail, and then there's a trial. And but oftentimes you'd have situations where like somebody maybe assaulted someone, and then the rest of the town says, all right, well, we're going to have our trial tomorrow. And then they would turn to that person's family and say, you have to make sure they show up.
Mm.
That was how
Yeah,
it
I
worked
think
in a lot of medieval Europe, because they didn't really have the capacity to
right.
have like a separate bureaucracy to like manage people. So it often fell on those kin groups to do it.
Yeah, and I think that
Um,
would in a lot of cases apply here.
yeah.
I have the city societally moving in a direction where like the central authority has been weakening. And
Hmm.
so the like heads of the sort of like kin group families, like the like
Yeah.
favored families are growing in power, and it's becoming slightly more centralized.
Yeah.
So they're like representatives, or like they're parts of the family that are partaking in the government and kind of ruling the uh, council side of the government, kind of
Hmm.
have their own little complexes where they maintain their own armies and guards. And most of the military forces are actually all owned by these individual families. And the nation doesn't necessarily have very many other than like their city guards and
Good.
um, that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
So that's great, because then it is, and that yeah, I think that's great. That makes a lot of sense. So when we think about how this military is organized, it would probably more reflect the organization of these families.
Mm,
So during the medieval period, oftentimes the civil society and military society were the same thing.
mm,
Um, so, for example, in pre-Norman England, which was not feudal, though the feudal has a lot of problems with with the word itself and how people understand feudal societies. But
mm,
so they were organized in clans, and they had common lands that the clans worked. But when you went to war, it would be your clan leaders who would also be your military officers.
mm,
Um, and so you may have a similar thing where the more important lines of descent for your kin groups would be the officers, and the less important ones would be the foot soldiers. And then you could also have things with rotating power. Like there could be a rotating power thing where these different families are responsible for different garrison duties,
right,
again, monthly or weekly or what have you. Or they could like vie for different positions, because
right,
being the people who watch the north fort complex over the river is probably a pretty good gig. You could
right,
probably get a lot of bribes and control trade and that sort of stuff.
right,
So
right.
that has a lot of politicking opportunities.
Mm,
um, and so there'd be this push and pull between the stuff that would be most valuable to do, but like everybody has to do stuff, because I guess if you're one of these families and you don't contribute to the defense of the community,
right.
then that's probably looked down upon.
Mm,
um and then I think we had something sheriff versus army versus barracks versus judge and courts. Well, like sheriffs were traditionally the, kind of the king would appoint somebody to do that job, and then the sheriff would have to go and do the king's justice or be the king's representative. But that often, especially in pre-Norman and for a while in post-Norman England, like there were the tithings and the hundreds and stuff. So like commoners often dealt with their own peace, like making peace and dealing with peace breakers and those sorts of things. They often didn't get the sheriff involved at all, because he often, it was just one guy frequently. He would have reeves sometimes, but it was a very decentralized system and people had to like do it themselves. And they had their own courts and their own trials and stuff. They didn't really need the king for that. First bear and and for keeping power, and thinking about policing, like contemporary policing is a rather recent thing. um it's something that emerges in the early modern period and doesn't really hit the English speaking world until the late modern period.
Mm-hmm.
um and when we think of France, for example, like they had gendarmes where it was essentially a military posting. So they weren't police like citizen. It wasn't a civilian force. It was like an explicitly military force where you know these were just guys who weren't at war at the moment.
Right.
And that's opposed to military police, who are a policing body within a military force.
Mm.
The royal court no longer hold the power, the nobles do. Yeah,
Right.
seems about right. Power equals the money or manpower. Yeah.
Mm. And we have a question earlier about the relevance of magic on the fortifications. In this world, the magic system that I have, it really wouldn't impact that sort of very much. Back when the city was built, magic was very much like, it's sort of like secret society-esque, where it was a very guarded secret where only a small number of people had it and used it, and like it was a mystifying thing to most people. And that's sort of where the temple over here comes in. That's sort of where their main place was. So it would not have been something that would factored into like warfare or defenses. Also, just the nature of the magic, but also how it was used in society. It just wouldn't have been very useful for that. So we don't have to worry about that here, at least.
And then Osif has another question here, and I would like to ask, like, how, like, does everybody in the society belong to one of these kin groups that's ruling
No.
things?
So
Okay.
the way it works, I mean, like everyone has a kin group, right? But sort of the way it works is that these main dominant kin groups now descend from essentially the rulers that have been chosen to rule at some point or another, because it's not a genetic like kingship. It's more of a, there's this magical entity that in the past used to select each new ruler. So that line of people who had more rulers chosen for it were believed to be more worthy and became, had more power, had the ability to amass power. So you have the class of like the favored, and then you have the class of people who have sworn themselves to a favored family. So they sort of, there's like they're not at the same class level, but they're sort of like, I vowed to serve the the spirits through serving this family that's favored by the spirits. And they're sort of like not servants, but like that sort of a thing. And then you have just normal families who their family is not as big of a deal and they're probably a little bit lower class, or more like, they're less power players. And then you would have the sort of like a fealty, but not quite the same. Like, I don't want to use the same word because it's not quite the same, but like that sort of a thing. And then you have the class of people who are sort of like your untouchables, and that's your class of people that have either were sworn and were kicked out, or abandoned their like swornness, right? And they abandoned their families, or they did something bad and the families kicked them out. So they've basically been, the word for them translates to like betrayers.
Oh, so they don't have like kin groups.
Right.
they're individuals. Ah, okay, yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. Often, and that also makes sense cross culturally, especially, not that, this is in your culture here, but for slavery, like usually cross culturally around the world, slaves are people who are removed from their communities and kin groups, like they've lost their relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Right.
those people tend to be, viewed not like other people because they don't have their relations, because what makes you a person is belonging to various communities and having those identities from those groups.
Mm-hmm. Right.
um so yeah, so if, I'm sure, I mean, Madeline would be able to decide to what sorts of thing guards care about. So historically, when you had um these kinds of forces, like, they could only care about what happens in public. They could only, maybe they only have power within certain limits, like the old walls, and anything that
Mm-hmm.
happens outside the old walls isn't really their problem. They could only care about certain things, so a lot of these kind of like customary law keeping forces, or like, medieval law keeping forces, only cared what happened in the market square. Like that was their job, to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that, all the market functioned. um
Right.
so yeah, you would want to decide things, but in the outskirts, like, yeah, civilians would probably just be dealing with problems they had as they came. I'm sure if something happened within a kin group, they would just keep it within their own kin group.
Yeah.
um
Yep.
and if something happened between kin groups, if it's the high families, then they would probably, have a political fight over that.
Mm-hmm.
But amongst, like, the lower families, yeah, they would probably just sort it out. Or if they do have like a patron system, then they would appeal it to one of the high families.
Right. Yeah.
um,
That's basically kind of what I've been
yeah,
picturing.
yeah. So that's great. It's very reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Outside cities, rural communities had a field watch. Yeah, those sorts of things, like, where citizens had like voluntary um, peacekeeping or law keeping. It was very common in the English speaking world, up until, like 200 years ago, to have like uh, holler and call systems, where, if you saw something, you said something, and you went to help if you could help. And then there was also night watch, which was usually voluntary. Well, voluntary as in, like, you kind of had to do it, but no one got paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it rotated, or they did it through lots. Or it was like, okay, everyone on this street has to have, someone from their family participate in the night watch for, the next period of time. Um, And speaking about, I'm from Canada. So speaking about Toronto, for example, there was a sheriff in Toronto when the Toronto Corporation, which was the name for the government of Toronto 200 years ago. Um, so there was a sheriff, and he was paid by taxes. And this was a rotating position that nobody really liked to have. And his job was to make sure that people actually did the night watch, because,
Mm-hmm.
like, people didn't like doing it. It wasn't very fun to stay up all night and wander around the streets. Um, and people would pay other people to do it for them. They would often not show up, and they were common people who were doing it that were more loyal to their communities than they were to the corporation and the ruling elites. And the ruling elites did not like this, because, they wanted to get away with things, or they wanted to have people who were beholden to them. And so that's what kind of encouraged them to get rid of the sheriff and the night watch system and replace it with a modern policing force. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that was someone that the corporation paid and controlled, rather than, just people living their lives doing their thing.
Right.
But yeah, that's often how, people kind of kept the peace. Exciting
Right.
history. Yeah.
And the comment here about how in a lot of rural places they still have night watches. And even
Yep.
in a lot of suburbia, like here in America in suburbia, you'll frequently have if you have a community, there'll be like HOAs or groups, and you'll put together a night watch, and people will take turns, like literally walking through at night at different hours or being available at different hours to just make sure there's not things going on. Like, definitely still a thing.
Yeah.
Extend the park in this Bailey? Question mark? Um,
Is there a Bailey?
it's not a real Bailey. It's
Oh, okay.
like
Yeah.
a little Bailey, you know, like so this part,
It feels
oh,
quite
what is it
big for
called?
a Bailey.
What?
It feels that inner city area feels quite big for a Bailey.
Yeah, so we did the maths. I think what was it? It's this is basically this area is like a little more than 1 square mile by 1 square mile is the big one right
Yeah.
here. And then the inner one is uh it's not quite as big as like the Forbidden City, but
Mm.
it's definitely like, you know, maybe half that
Mhm.
size based off our bad maths. But there's a thing, what is it called? Let me pull it up. An Inselberg or Monennock. It's an
Yeah.
isolated rock hill, knob, ridge, whatever. And that is, if you can sort of see behind here, these like contour lines.
Yeah.
The actual palace, Imperial Palace part, and then like a little bit of that temple in the back are kind of up on this Inselberg,
Hmm. Yeah,
which
that
is
makes sense.
very cool. Um,
Yeah, especially in the medieval period after the Romans, they often did not. They didn't really build many new fortifications,
mhm,
and oftentimes, the various Germanic people who were kind of migrating into the area, they would frequently just put their, cities or towns or what have you, just in annoying places, like on top of hills and like rocky outcrops and those sorts of things.
right,
Um, and if they were going to build fortifications, they would often be like just earthen ramparts and that kind of stuff. Like Mott and Bailey is traditionally like they were just earthen constructions. Sometimes they
right.
would have a wooden reinforcement or like a wooden faced embankment or something like that. But because I've seen some depictions where they have like stone and those sorts of things, it's like, nah, the Visigoths weren't working that hard.
Right. Right. Like why?
uh, but like people continued to maintain and keep Roman fortifications. That was very important for the Carolingians and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Though I think we're not very sure about how much stuff the Carolingians actually like built from scratch, because
Right.
you had an entire landscape with all of these fortifications that the Romans put there.
Yeah.
Upper
These
class people need to relax and walk in the park.
well, that is not even necessarily accessible to them yet. This is just the administrative center. I'm gonna need to build some over here. That's kind of why I left these two segments open near these favored families.
Hmm.
Again, the scale is wrong, but within these complexes that I have for them, like they'd have their own massive gardens and their own like little mini markets and little residential areas, and little like they're like
Yeah,
little tiny self-contained like villages almost.
yeah, they're compounds. Yeah.
Right, but I'll add some like some sort of I haven't figured out what if any like large scale public buildings, like I'll probably have some sort of like saunas or baths.
Hmm.
I'll probably like I haven't decided if I'm gonna build like gaming facilities, like I don't know, I know there's
So
gonna
they
be
can all play
sports.
Counter Strike.
I have like world builded part of a game that I want to have people do, so like it would make sense for them to be some level of like gaming places or fields or something, but I have not looked into it enough to know what that would look like in this era, you know?
Hmm.
I don't literally like everything in my brain is like either like okay, we either like literally make a coliseum or like we literally make that like the like Olympic fields in Olympia or
Yeah.
whatever, or it's like a modern football stadium. That's like all the
Yeah.
options my brain has provided to me.
Well, and
Mhm.
you've got like the ball courts
Mhm.
of Mesoamerica have
Mhm.
were very prolific, and it wasn't. I think sometimes people like that. It wasn't one game, and the courts are not a single size. I mean, this was played over like centuries, thousands of years. So,
Mm,
it was probably a very different game in different places at different time, or at the very least, different rules. Um, so yeah, like you can have all sorts of different sized playing fields and these kinds of things.
right. Yeah, like a
Oh, yeah.
theater, they'd probably have theaters and like
Yeah.
facilities like that. Although with the way I'm doing this, honestly, what I can probably just do, because the way I'm doing it is just sort of based off like income levels. So if I just have some bigger buildings in the wealthy merchant type area, that I could
Hmm.
fill it in with all those types of things, you know?
Yeah.
Probably
We
work.
got state-run diners. Hey, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, they'll be something.
Because yeah, the way that urban people need to get food is often quite difficult, and
Mhm.
in antiquity and in the medieval period, people often did not have the convenience of having ovens and those sorts of things in their apartments or
Mm,
in their urban homes because their homes were small, so they wouldn't have a very effective cooking oven. So they would
mm,
often have to use communal cooking ovens. This even happened in rural areas as well, where bakers in a lot of medieval communities, like they would, have their big ovens, and people would come by with like stuff they made, like pies and stuff, and maybe
mhm.
their own breads and things, and they'd be like, "Hey, here's, can you put this in your oven?"
Right.
Because they couldn't kind of afford to keep their oven going, and um, it wouldn't have been very efficient
Mhm.
distribution of resources. And thinking of that as well, you got to figure out where your fuel sources are.
Ooh, don't you worry about that.
You
I'm
need
ready. The next step is my arboriculture in my
excellent.
isolated state model.
That's good. Because yeah,
Oh.
you definitely need to have a source of fuel or several sources of
Mhm,
fuel within the city, um, to keep it going, or nearby the city.
mhm. That's all
Um,
these nice little blue clouds.
oh, okay, that's good.
If you were wondering what my non marked by a key shapes were.
Blue clouds. Okay, so yeah, you've got a decent amount of wooded area, and they the kind of agroforestry.
Mm,
The trees will probably be trimmed in order to ensure that they create a lot of I'm having a brain fart. A lot of stems or branches that are a good
right.
size for
Yeah.
fuel.
So they'll probably be like, to an extent, like little, like nice little like rows of trees, nice and orderly.
Hmm.
Very, very cute. Very demure.
Very mindful tree placements.
Yes, yes, yes.
Because what they would often do is coppice or pollard their trees,
Mm-hmm.
in Europe at the very least. Um, so thinking about so like cutting a tree down to a stump is coppicing.
Okay.
And when you do that, then you're encouraging a lot of individual shoots to come off of the stump,
Mm-hmm.
and those shoots
For
would be a
firewood.
good size for like sticks for firewood. And then pollarding is when you do that higher up the tree, I believe.
Right.
um,
Makes sense.
I'm just going to double check so I don't sound silly. Yes, so when you pollard, you let the tree grow up, um, and then about head height or so, you let it branch off, and then you cut um, off the branches to encourage it to kind of like create these like knobs that will create a bunch of shoots.
Mm,
And then you can come by with your bill hook, and you
mm.
can cut them off, which is and then people started using that to kill each other, as they do.
Yeah. Yep. If they haven't figured out how to kill each other with it yet, they will.
They will.
Kind of have my entire city be by permaculture forests in my setting.
Permaculture is very cool.
Yeah, that is neat. Yeah, like
Right.
in theory, there'd be like I feel like the city's been around long enough that they would actually have to worry about it. Like, there's a lot of trees here, but they're definitely not going to be optimal for maintaining like a city like this. So even though this is surrounded by like tons and tons of forests, like they would have their,
Well, and when you're thinking about wood for construction and wood for fuel, like when you chop down a tree, that's green wood. Like you don't want to
Mm,
build with that. Like you need to ideally dry the wood for some
mm,
period of time in order for it to be useful for building or burning.
mm,
Um, I've lived in places where we need to chop firewood. You cannot
mm.
chop down a tree and then like huck it in your oven
Nope.
or your stove or whatever and hope that it works.
Right.
Sometimes your cooking place and your heating thing are the same thing. Um, so, that's why, yeah, old and green new wood, right? So, you would, and if you, are chopping down an old growth tree, that's a big tree, right? Like you can use an old growth tree, like that probably be very important for making ships or
Mm,
for trade or for building large posts for like big buildings. Like you wouldn't want to cut that up and use it for like firewood. Like that'd be kind of a
mm,
desperation move for an organized society. So yeah, having trees that are specifically being raised for fuel or to produce shoots for fuel, it's much more efficient to convert those sticks that you're going to get from those trees into
mm,
fuel for burning because you're going to be able to dry them out faster and you're going to be able to portion them easier. That is
mm.
another thing. Like when you need to use wood for cooking, for you want it to be specific. You don't want to use more than you have to.
A whole tree
Um,
for one loaf of bread.
yes. Uh, AM doesn't tend to have a lot of wooden architecture, a lot of mud, brick, and stone. That depends on
Mm,
when and where you are and like what the architectural conventions are, because wooden stuff from way back when just doesn't tend to survive very well. Um, uh, so you know, um, and often like even if you build something out of mud brick or stone, you would have like a wooden foundation, or you could have wooden
mm.
floor and those kinds of things, or you'd need it for the ceiling or something. So it's still an important part for building, or if you want boats, canoes, you know.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, there's a lot of other choices for your architecture. I mean, there are very cool Thai and like Vietnamese community homes and those sorts of things that are built from wood.
Mm,
Um, you know, uh, what about the city's climate? How would that change forestry, building, and fortifications? The city seems to be at like an AFAM boundary.
mm,
Um, so part of the city's fortifications, like there is a theory, the reason why particularly like in China they started building these like large earth rampart walls was to help like deflect monsoon floods.
mm,
um I don't necessarily buy that, but you would want to place your fortifications in a way where they would not be flooded. So you'd probably want to create, a system of canals and dikes and other things that would like move water in different places so that it
mm,
didn't flood out your fortifications. A very common tactic in East and Southeast Asia was to, go upriver and like blow a dam, which would cause a flood that would kill millions of people. World War One numbers for the medieval world. Um, so yeah, you'd want to think about those sorts of things. If you have more rain, you're going to have more erosion, but that
mm,
is why oftentimes these earthen rampart walls would be stone faced.
mm, mm.
Because water is absorbed into earth, unless it's very compact, in which case you can minimize that. But it slides off stone or asphalt or what have you. So if
Right.
you're putting stone on the top of your walls and on the side, that will help mitigate it. Um,
Makes sense.
how would that change forestry? In a lot of cultures who live in like AF and AM areas, the agriculture that they have is often like agroforestry, and often that is, we can think about some ways of doing that as making the forest into a garden, like into a food system,
Hmm.
where in thinking of like England's tradition of horticulture and plantations, you are creating a space to cultivate a little perfect food system.
Mm.
So that's a distinction in the way of thinking. Um, and when Europeans showed up in places that had like AF and AM, and they're like, oh, like look, they just go into the woods and there's like fruit trees all over the place, and it's like, well, no, like people planted fruit trees there and they organized the trees so that they would be in certain places.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things with the domestication of the avocado. And it seems like there were 6 different places where avocado was like cultivars were domesticated. Well, what's difficult is that these avocado plantations were planted in the forest alongside wild avocados. So there's a lot of gene transfer back and forth. So sometimes it's
Mm.
very difficult to say what is a wild avocado and what is a domestic avocado. Um, and if so, if we're thinking about what horticulture looks like, uh, we may just see a group of trees, like, oh, that looks like a forest, and these people may say, no, no, this is my food system.
Hmm.
Your
Mm.
food system is a field of wheat. My food system is this, lovely forest with berries and fruits and, all sorts of other things, medicines and stuff in it.
Mm.
Um,
Right. Yeah, which is like,
Taresh's 400-meter tides. Oh, that's your main city. Yes. I was surprised. I was like, Madeline has 400-meter tides for this city?
oh no, I don't know how I'd get them up that high. This is a, but we have the contour lines. Hold on, let me see if it's my Photoshop's being incredibly. Can't even just move it up. It's over 1,000 feet, so 400 foot wouldn't do as it's fine.
400 meters. 400 meters is over 1,000 feet, I feel.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I'm an American, so
Yeah.
I don't know what a meter is.
Oh, no. 1 kilometer is, oh, I don't even know, because you can't use inches for that. What is it, feet? Yeah. 1 kilometer is 3,000 feet, more or less. It's a bit, so I think it's like 3,200 feet.
Let me save. The chat is reminding me to save. Yeah, I'm horrendous with like some people just know them. Like my husband's pretty good with like he can just like in his head just convert everything back and forth between like the metric system and like to Celsius and all that stuff. And I'm just like, I'm useless. I'm so sorry.
Well, here we use Celsius for our temperatures. People often talk about their own weights and heights in feet and pounds.
Mm,
But when we talk about distances and the weight of just stuff, we tend to use kilometers and grams and
mm,
kilograms. Though at the grocery store, a lot of stuff is in pounds and in grams or ounces or whatever. But usually people are like, okay, well, it's like half a kilogram is about a pound.
right.
So we get by. Amazing how much they can share off the top of their head about specific chosen zone. I do so a lot of the stuff that I do as like a human and social geographer, working on like cultural and historic geography around settler colonialism, is actually looking at how indigenous infrastructural systems encountered and were interpreted by European settlers. So it just happens to be something that I study and know about. Again, my world building kind of shaped my path in academia. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I think that's also a rare thing to be able to talk so well about it, just like just having all that knowledge
yeah,
with the with
and
which is also again part of why you're here. Like,
yeah, and a lot of the stuff that I've been doing recently has been in like permaculture and thinking about different like agricultural systems. And I've been working with different indigenous nations on developing permaculture systems, or I've been working with indigenous nations to help reinvigorate and restore or adapt their kind of customary or ancestral lifeways and food systems to the current world, and that's where the goats get involved because um, the Himalayan blackberry, is not native here, and it often interferes with a lot of other berries, like the local blackberry, local strawberries, those sorts of things, salmon berries and stuff. So goats will eat anything, and they're great. They're very nice. They follow you around. Um, they're really nice little guys. So we take out goats into an area and we just have them eat back all of the blackberry bushes and their thorns and stuff. And then after that, we can do a burn and we can begin like kind of rejuvenating the food systems that the local indigenous folks want.
that's really cool.
Goats are mean too. They eat it all. Well, that's why you have to watch them. And so they don't eat the stuff you don't want them to eat. But like in a lot of the Pacific Northwest, like things like English ivy and Scotch broom
Mm,
and the blackberries have like just kind of overrun everything. So, if you want to bring back and reinvigorate indigenous food systems, then they do need to eat everything, which is
mm.
fine.
Yeah, fair.
And then the burns help get rid of the roots and stuff for the plants that aren't very resistant to it, and for the stuff that is resistant to it, because I'm currently in a Mediterranean climate where a lot of the plants developed to work well with burns in the summer or in the spring or fall or what have you, and indigenous peoples leveraged that and created their own burning technologies and of when they do it and how they do it. Um, uh, so burning stuff after the goats eat it, helps replenish the soil, gets rid of the stuff you don't want, and encourages the growth of different foods and medicines that those people would like. Should there be goats and pigs in the city?
Trough animals. That is in Ring. Hold on, let me pull it
If
up in our cheat sheet. That is in the first closest to the city ring, where we have our most intensive agriculture and our dairying or trough-fed animals. So anything like our pigs, our cows, that sort of a thing.
well, in this case, you have chickens.
That's
So
true. There's also chickens, and that's going to be in all these little like some of these plots here. These are going to be our small garden type agriculture and animals. Some of
yeah,
them are going to be in there.
like chickens, especially for urban areas, are much more convenient than pigs
Mm.
because they're smaller. They don't take up as much space. They give us eggs.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, chickens were more favored in certain places that had higher density than pigs were, because pigs don't take up as much space.
Mm.
But pigs, are also chunky, protein storage units. So
Mm. Yeah, I think that'll be like I think that'll be good. And then I'm gonna have to I think so right now in terms of the rings that we have right now. I said right now like 5 times. Can I say it 5 more? So in this ring, so like here, getting into this region, and then I'll have some more kind of in some other areas. That's gonna be that first ring of like our intensive agriculture, the small scale like garden stuff. And then we have the arboriculture, which is mainly going to be these little like fields of trees I'm making now.
Hmm.
And then the next ring is going to be our farming, which will be any of your like large scale. It's going to be mainly rice farming, maybe a little bit of wheat farming, and other grains kind of in the larger area. So you'll probably get that more like where I have some of these blue lines. That's sort of maybe where some of that more farming would kind of start to be
The
present.
the contour farming kind of downhill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and how are you? And I guess there are a couple ways to organize. What's the major agricultural crop?
Rice.
Rice. Okay, so then you have a couple ways you can do it. Like one
Mm,
thing is like everybody can just kind of live near the city, and then they go walk off to their plots in the morning, and they do their work because it doesn't take all that much time to actually cultivate your rice.
mm,
Um, I have friends who have gone to Japan, and they've there are settlements where people work in town, they
mm.
come back into their rural area, and they also have their family rice plots. So on
Oh,
the weekends they work the rice plots, and during the week they go to work, and that seems to work for their system.
that's really
Uh,
cool.
so a lot. But I mean, the thing is that so but like the amount of rice they're making, so the intensity isn't as much
Mm,
because they're like they're also working, so they can buy and do other stuff. But they're able to grow enough rice for themselves and also sell some.
right,
So that's more of like a cottage industry rice rather than very like intensive agricultural system where like the biggest output is rice.
right.
Um, but it could mean everybody lives near the city and then they go out and do it, and then they
Mm,
come home. You could also do a system where you have your rice plots, uh, and then they kind of surround these little settlements
mm,
that the farmers live in.
mm,
So you have, thinking about like kind of like a network where you've got a little blob where there's like, like maybe a dozen buildings and people live there, and then they go to the rice fields around them and they
mm-hmm.
work those rice fields and they live there. Um, or you could set up a system where you have, like a couple buildings, and they are beside a handful of plots. So
Mm,
it just depends on how these people think about themselves and how they organize themselves for their agriculture, right? Because if they're more communal, then
right,
you'd want to have like these kind of scattered batches where you could have like a kin group or two related kin groups or whatnot living together and like concentrating their resources and their services.
right,
But if you have, if they have like a more individualistic um, way of organizing their rice cultivation systems, then they're going to be more spread out service wise. But
right.
if they're close enough to a city, they may not need to concentrate all their services. So you may have a
Yeah,
building that has like a few dozen people living in it all related to each other, and they work the rice plots, and then if they need anything they wander into the city for it.
right. Yeah, I
um
think that makes sense.
so it's um
Yeah.
tensorflows for me is very, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and part of this ring system here, not that they're exact rings, but everything that's closer to the markets and the main bureaucratic center and everything is going to be your more intensive stuff. So like most of your farming that is closer to here is going to be more intensive than the stuff that's further away. In general, is sort of the system I'm kind of trying to follow here. So like the
Hmm.
stuff that's like basically everything that would be on this map is going to be your more intensive versions of the farming, and then
Hmm.
as you get further away it's going to be less and less intensive as you get away from like these densely populated areas and it's a little bit less under strict
Yeah.
control, and then as you get even further out then we'll get into like pastoralism, but that won't show up on here at all, I don't think.
Well, that's a mile. Oh, that little. Okay, it's good. You showed what a mile is. Excellent.
Yeah.
So, so this is a mile. Looks to be about 500. Is that pixels, or I don't know what you're working with.
Uh,
So,
300, 382.8 pixels is a mile. But the distance between the two rivers is 8.62 miles.
Okay. But I mean, your whole map here seems to be like, what, 7,200?
Pixels?
Yeah.
It's 7,000, I think, or is it 7,200? Yeah, 7,200 by like 4,800, I think it is.
And how far is a mile
Uh,
in pixels?
382.8 pixels.
382. Okay, so it's about, off the top of my head, about just under 20 miles.
Mm,
And you can walk a mile in like 15, 16 minutes, maybe
right.
20 minutes.
Mm,
So anyone in the city, if there's a field, if they're in the city, on the outskirts of the city, and there's a field at the edge of your map to the east here, they could walk there and work and then walk back at the end of the day.
right. Right. So I
Like,
like might have
it's
some like
not.
far off little villagey peoples, but like uh it'll be probably a little bit more organized in terms of like less separate.
Rice farming doesn't lend itself to individualism. A lot of labor is required to get the rice to the point of self-sufficiency. Yeah, it really depends on the form of rice infrastructure you're working on. Like, there's
Mhm.
super labor-intensive um, ways of like making rice terraces and rice paddies and controlling the water and those sorts of things. So it depends on the form of rice infrastructure for the agriculture you want to make, and it's also the kind of rice too, because there are some rices that um, are easier to work on. And we also can think too, like these people have been living here, like the city's been here for 500 years, but like people have probably been living here longer.
Mm,
So, how old are these rice beds? Like, how long have people been farming rice here? It could have been started in a more collective, state managed way or communally managed way. And now, it could have gotten to a point where, one household can manage a decent number of rice plots, right?
mm,
And we do see shifts back and forth between these sorts of things. There's often, I don't know, like, and this comes to Europeans as well. Like, I've seen it where it's like, oh, East Asian or, just quote unquote Asian cultures are more collectivist because of rice. And then, Europeans are more individualist because of wheat.
mm,
But there are certainly very collectivist ways of organizing wheat and similar grain agriculture. I mean, that's what happened during the medieval period. People had commons, people shared plots, people worked smaller areas, they lived closer together. I think some of this comes from contemporary farming practices or farming practices that we saw in North America, specifically the States during colonization, and how people like carved up the land for wheat farming.
mm,
Um, uh, so yeah, it's like there's a lot of possibility in how people can go about doing it. But if you are like, managing water systems for irrigation and stuff like that, that is always going to be a communal endeavor. And we see that in wheat farming in Europe and in like Central Asia and in northern East Asia, because there's a lot of wheat in northern East Asia.
mm,
And that's very communal in the ways that they organize their irrigation and their agriculture and that sort of thing. Um, the other stuff that I do is based around Central Asia, and the Central Asian irrigation, especially in Afghanistan and Tajikistan, is exceptionally interesting and very cool um, in how they communal or family managed. Usually it would be communal. So you'd communally manage your irrigation and your larger infrastructure for farming,
mm,
but then usually smaller family units would be doing the farming. Like, even in a even in a more like collective culture, you would still have to distribute the labor into smaller organizational groups.
mm.
um I don't know.
Um,
I don't know how much farming the noble families do.
no, I mean, so the way I sort of imagine it is a lot of these families probably also control like regions outside of this main region, right? So, like, if we do I still have it up? If we consider this whole capital area, which, like, if you see these two little rivers, that's where our capital city is.
Oh, cool.
they're probably going to have dominant control over this whole valley. But some of these other more separate areas, however that would be divided, would probably have like subgroups that are control of it from like a bureaucratic administrative perspective, and then would be sort of like underneath of the power of the whatever you want to call it, a kingdom, like the whole ruler of the island. But the families would be partially in control of, like, branches of the families would be in control of those areas, and then they'd also have parts of the branches of those families in the capital city, in the council and the administration of the whole country, like controlling the puppet king and influencing lawmaking and basically making things work better for their regions back home and stuff. So like they probably wouldn't be responsible for farming here per se, or there might be like maybe there's one family that's more in charge of stuff here, but like for the most part, most of their resources will be like within
outside
their duties in their small areas, and then also in their regions back home, and then whatever their administrative roles are.
But the like the people in that family themselves, like they wouldn't be the ones going into the field. There would be other people doing that for them.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's sort of like they're sort of like nobles.
Well, they're elites. I think that's
they're the elites, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. The elites probably wouldn't be doing all that much farming, but they would be managing other people who are doing the farming. And to be frank, in Bali and other places like that, where there was like there was an aristocratic elite, but they just fought each other. It was the commoners and the religious kind of specialists who controlled all of the irrigation and did all the farming and stuff like that. I think Bali is actually a very interesting example because the various communities expected everybody to participate, and of course, like in like planning festivities and those sorts of things, and they would actually take a penalty from people who didn't. And of course, the elites who were only interested in going to war with one another didn't participate in any of these things. So the commoners would transfer, a tax in like food to the elites. And the elites would give money to them and other things in order to continue to have everyday life function and ritual events and festivals and these sorts of things. And so like we can think of it, they're aristocratic elites. All they did was war. They were warriors, but at the same time, and they were dominating and they had a superior position. At the same time, there was more back and forth in, what people had to give to one another in those societies.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah. What was that book? There's a really great book. Let me check my library quickly. Everyone can hear me type loudly.
Yeah, well, he's looking for that. I'm just building my little the main church center that's more focused on like the less society focused one, the more like harmony, nature, whatever. I'm just building their little complex out here now.
Here we go. Great book. Priests and Programmers, Technologies of Power in the Engineered Landscape of Bali.
Oh.
Yeah. That came out in 2007. That was a very fun read. I mean, I deal a lot with infrastructure, so I think that's very fun. but talked about the complexities of the irrigation infrastructure and the way that the ritual specialists, the priests, organized the agricultural systems and the irrigation with the commoners, and how the commoners kind of managed their own lives, and then the elites just kind of killed each other.
Yeah.
I think that was the best way to have elites.
They would like a link. See, trying to see if I can find it on like Amazon or something. The link.
Oh, I can send it to you.
Okay, yeah. If you send it to me, I can send it to them.
How would the geology affect it? Well, I mean, it would kind of influence the kinds of stones that you'd use. But I mean, for this sort of thing, you're using like earth. And like you wouldn't be using like a rammed earth fortification in a tundra or somewhere that's been scraped clean by glaciers.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd be where go? There you go. So that's something that you'd want to think about. But as far as the stone goes, I mean, there's a lot of different stone that you could use to face rammed earth fortifications. I mean, you'd also want to think about how deep you'd have to dig. So, if there's a region with a lot of erosion where, you're very close to bedrock or something like that, that wouldn't be very convenient. The big thing when you're thinking about where you want to place fortifications and cities and that kind of thing in wetter regions like this is you don't put it on a bog.
Yeah.
That's, if your city's sinking because of the weight of everything, that's not a very good idea. So, if you want to make sure there's enough drainage to build things, if you want to have like heavy fortifications and stuff like that, or else your city will sink. Those are some of the things that are like geology. Oh, how is the religion organized, Madeline? MV is asking.
So it's a little complicated, and I don't want to I mean this in the most like accepting way possible, but like in here their religion is something that's not based off a belief system per se, right? Because it's like there's literal magic and literal like, not to say that there aren't real things for real religions, but it's, you get what I'm saying, right? Like it's
more yeah, like the magic in their world is much more self-evident.
Yes,
and not necessarily an article of faith.
Exactly. There's no faith behind it. So what you have is you have two goddesses, one which is more focused on sort of like the nature and a balance between the spirits, and the spirits not meaning like spirits of people, but like magic spirits. And people and society, and like having this balance where they work together, and then one goddess who has more of a focus on society and community and the development of that between people, and is more focused on supporting that side of it. And then you have the spirits beneath them, and then the city and this whole island was basically protected by the like one of the spirits that basically they're winds. So basically the main like sort of, not like their trade wind, but like the main wind that blows over this island was sort of led by this one spirit that used to protect them and like choose their rulers and all this stuff. So you have sort of two main religions that kind of worship more the philosophies of the two different goddesses. So it's less direct worship and more like philosophies. And then you have like the organizations that govern magic and rituals within the actual like infrastructure of the city and that sort of thing, but they're all kind of disconnected. So like the magic system, which also has to do with working with the spirits and this like, the religious side of it, is a lot more bureaucratic in many parts of it from the philosophical side of the religions, which doesn't necessarily have to do with the direct interfacing with like the spirits and the magic aspects of it. If that sort of makes sense. it's
yeah, that
it's
makes sense.
complicated because it's like,
Yeah.
it's weird.
What do we have? Oh, cute James, like Venice. Yeah. So yeah, Venice. They built that out in a marsh. Though they did build that. They did go out there for defensive reasons, right? Like had these people who were kind of fleeing, the Western Roman Empire, and various Germanic peoples moving around, and they decided to go out there so they could continue to practice, kind of a bit more of a egalitarian communal existence. And marshy swamp water makes a great defensive position with very little input. you know and
Fair.
early Venice was actually super egalitarian because everyone who lived out there was like, I don't know, a salt farmer. No, they were like fishing and doing those sorts of things. They everyone had more or less the same stuff. They solved a lot of their political problems, um, that through open air assemblies. Um, Eventually, they elected two consuls, and they elected like a duke, the duce. Um, However, so the two consuls were there to make sure the duce stayed in line. But for the first few hundred years of Venice as like this, kind of, open air kind of public republic system, only like one or two dukes got through their term without being exiled, assassinated, or blinded.
Oh,
So like whenever these dukes tried to like, exercise tyranny or something like that, the people of Venice would just murk them.
it's like, nope.
But and this, they were managed to keep like, a pretty equal situation for quite some time, like, hundreds of years. And then, eventually as they started to break up their society into different, kind of oligarchic circles, because you had like one assembly that involved a lot of people, a lot of citizens, and then a smaller assembly that was a smaller group of families. As you start to centralize power, and as fewer families start to gain more power, then you start to see this shift for a more oligarchical republic system. And you see the same thing in like Geneva and stuff like that too. Like Geneva started out as everyone was a citizen and everyone was involved in politics, and then over time it started to become more and more centralized and oligarchic or aristocratic. Yes, there are several places built on marshes, but when you're thinking about your fortifications, rampant earth walls would probably not work that great.
Mm.
And when people decided that they wanted to originally live in the marshes that would become Venice, they did not imagine stealing a bunch of churches and then putting them there.
No, that wasn't like top #1 game plan.
No, that wasn't their game plan. They grew into that. They're like, oh, this is a nice piazza you have here. Be a shame if we took it back to our swamp.
I don't know why that's so funny.
And then I one of the universities I've been to several universities in my graduate career is in London, Ontario, or in Nishnabemowin, the Deshgan Zibi. And London is built on a swamp, and they now have a problem because they've only been there a few hundred years now, and it's sinking. The downtown is sinking into the ground.
Oh.
No great loss, but it's the it is pretty funny. Yeah, and like people are building, they drain out a lake or something, and then they build little cities there, towns, and start agriculture there. And then when a big rain happens, it gets flooded. And like, oh no, who could have foreseen building in a floodplain would result in this?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Dublin, Ireland was too built in a swamp. That's true. That's why the Vikings like the swamp.
I mean, whatever works. That's fine. It's definitely interesting to think about, because like you don't, like, I don't know, you don't picture these places as swamps, but like Baby swamps.
And usually when we see, like oftentimes, early settlements are not early settled places aren't at the very mouth of a river where you have these estuaries that are very swampy or marshy.
Mm,
Because one, you have to deal with tides, and two, it's salt water, so you don't want to drink that. And also, there's bugs, and it's wetter than you'd like it to be.
mm,
So people generally tend to be, further upstream than the very mouth of it. The Vikings, and I guess there may have been a Christian like church, kind of like monk settlement in what became Dublin before the Vikings showed up. But like like there were monks, like they did not have those same concerns as other people. Suffering is kind of the point. And for the Vikings, they have their ships, so they wanted a place that was very chill where they could pull their ships and bring them in and out of the water and that kind of thing.
mm.
Um,
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
they don't look like a swamp anymore, but the swamp is there, just under the surface. Beneath the
Yeah,
concrete is swamp, and the swamp consumes.
everything.
Yeah, the swamp consumes everything. You don't sink into the swamp. The swamp slowly swallows you.
Cool. It is just about 7. Did you have
It is
to?
just about 7. Yeah, I'm gonna have to bounce soon.
Okay.
It is very wet today on the West Coast. It is going to be wet for the foreseeable future, and my wife normally rides her bike to work, but
Mm,
that was not in the cards for today.
fair. Very
There was
fair.
a
Okay.
monastery in Dublin in the early centuries before the Vikings. Yeah, yeah, the suffering monks. I said that.
Oh my gosh. Quick question for those of you still in the chat. I need to decide if I'm going to start off tomorrow morning with either continuing this map, but again, we are getting into a little bit more of the tedium, right, of this mapping. So I can continue just working on that and we can just chat and it could be super chill, or I can move on to making like a proper like layout map of specific buildings or facilities. So like I need to make a map of the temple, I need to make a map of the academy. I could do something more like that where we'll actually be like talking and interacting more so than me just being here like, let's draw a little house. Let's draw another little house. Let's draw a third little house. Ooh, some trees, So just let me know if you have a preference there, or I'll, I guess I'll just see how I'm feeling in the morning. But I don't know what the priority for me is. I mean, I'm gonna do all of this stuff. I need to get it all done anyway, so it matters not to me because I will be doing it all. um, but yeah, that's been good. But yeah, this was very helpful having you on, Ross. I knew it would be, but
Hey, it's very very fun to be here. Did and if you don't have anyone for tomorrow, I'm not sure if the 2 o'clock. No, for me it's 2 o'clock. For you it's 5 o'clock. The 5 o'clock would work. But if no one's shown
yeah,
up for your 2 o'clock, which would be my 11 o'clock, I could come back if that's useful. But I don't have that much to say about you know university floor plans.
yeah.
Uh,
I mean, like, who knows? Maybe you do. Yeah, I'll look
I've
at. I know
I've
I
been
have
in enough
someone
of them,
coming
but
in for. I have a world building, a writer friend that's gonna hop on, and like basically they're like, I don't know where to put my capital city, and I don't know like anything about what it's gonna look like, and we were gonna do like a quick and dirty map on that, but I can't remember which section she was going to uh be available for. So I'll look at that and
yeah.
let you know. But that would be awesome.
If you look at that and let me know,
Yeah.
just commentate. Yeah. Because I think you're starting at 8 a.m. your time, which is 5 a.m. my time.
Very early, yes.
So the 8 a.m. for you and the 11 a.m. for you are too early for me. But if
Yeah,
you
yeah.
let me know by that point if
Yes.
2 would work,
Yes, I will do
your
that.
time, then I could make that choice.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. and I could come
Sweet.
back and just commentate
Would be
and
fun.
tell obscure stories about fur trades or something.
Which would definitely be helpful for me if I'm just drawing little buildings, you know?
Drawing the little buildings, yeah, for sure.
Oh my gosh. Okay, yeah, I think that sounds like a good plan. And I'll probably cut this stream off for tonight here then, since I know you need to go. I'm probably gonna go and like take a bath and pick my kid up from he's like at a thing. So I'm gonna go pick him up and then take a bath and then chill out and rest and get ready for tomorrow. Oh, you have to Bob Ross it. Have you ever been told that before?
I have to Bob Ross it?
Yeah.
No, I have not been told that. Ross, the story behind me being Ross Bay is that I lived at a place called Ross Bay, and for my television in that apartment, I called that the Ross Bay fireplace, and I needed a Google account for the television because it was like a Sony TV and it needs Google to like do things.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I responded to Edgar, that was the YouTube account that I was using at the time. So that is why I am Ross Bay.
I like it.
Because that's where I was living at the time, not because that's my name. So yeah.
But it's still fun. You could embrace the Bob Ross spirit, you know, I'm just saying.
Yeah. I did like it was Rossi B and Eddie G for me and Edgar.
I like
that was a fun stream. Our shore names.
Oh my gosh, that's brilliant. Yes, yeah. Happy little trees. I will find my Bob Ross t-shirt. I will find it. I will find it. If I have to like, I don't know, I'll find it. It'll happen. That is what I will be wearing tomorrow.
Excellent. Well, maybe I'll show up for that then.
Good. Bob Ross t-shirt, you know.
All right.
Be good. I was almost Bob Ross for Halloween and then I wasn't, but
all right, well, have a good night.
Yeah, you too.
You've earned it. Hard at world building.
I know, 12 hours in. I mean, I've had a couple little breaks, but like, whoo.
The fiction, the fiction factory.
Yes, and we've made this much progress.
Hey, I mean that's pretty good.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Starting from nothing. I mean that's kind of decent. And have you done something like that before?
A city map?
Yeah.
I've done like sketchy city maps, like when I was in my phase of like, I'm gonna make an epic world and I'm gonna develop all 87 cities, even though none of them show up in my book at all, and I'm gonna draw city maps for all of them, even though they all kind of suck. I did that. You know.
Yeah.
Super good use of my time.
Oh, and tomorrow we can talk about the IPA. That's something, because you were talking about Erlkönig, the was it Erlkönig or whatever? Didn't get a chance to talk about the IPA and how that's useful.
Yeah, that could be a lot of fun.
That could also be fun. We're not going to diss rocks.
No. True.
It's been enough of that.
That was great. Were you here when Conlangery showed up?
Yes, I was. And he invited y'all to participate in the conlang relay.
That would be the biggest dumpster fire to put me on a conlanging relay. Like, it would be really funny and really great entertainment value, as I'm like, I literally don't know what grammar is, people. Like, an adjective, I don't know. How am I supposed to decipher this, you know? It would be a hoot. But
when, you know, someone's like, oh, you need to translate it into your language, and then it's like, okay, but then like I don't know how to read this, and I also don't know how to tell other people to say my thing because I don't know the IPA.
Right, I can barely pronounce English. What do you want from me? There need to be like a elementary version or like a preschool version, and I could be like on the preschool team, you know?
Okay, yeah, there needs to be like a junior and a senior conlanging team.
Like, we can count to 5, you can count to 1,000,000, but we can count to 5, and we sometimes skip 4.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Oh yeah, that would be a hoot. But yes, one day I will maybe know a single character in the IPA.
Hey, it's very Eurocentric, so you probably know most of the characters in the IPA because it's Latinate.
Okay, that's probably fair. Maybe.
Like,
but then there's probably some confusing ones.
Just makes the S sound. So like the S character makes the S sound. The T
Okay.
character makes the T sound. The D character makes the D sound. M makes the M sound.
Sometimes we skip forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the way counting works in preschool. Yeah. Okay, so maybe I know slightly more than I thought I did.
I think if you're coming from a, Germanic or romantic language, you're, pretty well set for most of the IPA.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good then. All right, then it'll be fine. We'll see.
It'll be fun.
We'll see.
Okay.
But yes, we need to call it, people. We need to go do things, and I need to go to sleep. Not that I'm going to go to sleep, but I need to not stare at a computer screen or sit in a chair for a while. Okay, yes. So I will see everyone in the morning. Thank you all for coming. It's been delightful. Hopefully we see Ross again tomorrow. Thank you for coming, Ross.
Of course. This is fun.
Yes, I'm gonna click the end stream button now.
Bye, Formica.
I'm doing it.